The desert highway stretched endlessly under the cold light of the moon. The only sound was the low hum of the car engine and the soft crackle of a radio station fading in and out. Alex tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Beside him, his girlfriend Claire leaned her head against the window, watching the night roll by. "Gas is almost gone," Alex muttered, glancing at the fuel gauge needle hovering just above empty. Claire sat up, frowning. "How far to the next station?" He shook his head. "Not sure. Out here, it could be hours." The desert around them was silent and empty. No lights, no other cars, just an endless stretch of road cutting through the blackness. Then, in the distance, a dim neon sign flickered weakly against the night. The letters buzzed, half burnt out, but still readable. Desert Star Motel. Relief washed over Claire's face. Finally. "Let's just stop there before we run out completely." The parking lot was empty when they pulled in. The motel itself looked worn, as if time had passed it by. Its wooden siding was cracked, the paint faded to dull gray. A single light over the office door flickered, casting long shadows across the empty lot. Inside the small office, a man sat behind the desk. His skin was pale, and his expression flat, almost unreadable. He wore an old vest and tie, clothes that looked decades out of date. Without saying much, he slid a tarnished key across the counter. "Room 6, he said, in a dry voice. Alex hesitated, but Claire picked up the key. "Thank you," she said quickly, eager to get out of the office. The room smelled faintly of dust and something older, like burnt wood, hidden deep beneath the fresh paint. The furniture was simple, worn, but functional. A small table, 2 chairs, a bed with faded covers, and a tall mirror leaning against the wall. Claire tried to laugh off the eerie feeling. "Well, it's not the Hilton, but at least we're not stranded in the desert." Alex forced a smile. "Yeah, let's just get some sleep." They unpacked lightly and settled in. The night outside was still, not even the chirp of insects. Claire drifted off first, the long drive catching up with her. Alex lay awake, staring at the ceiling, uneasy without knowing why. Around midnight, the lamp on the nightstand flickered. Then it went out. Moments later, the tall floor lamp in the corner switched on by itself, buzzing faintly as if struggling to hold its light. Alex sat up quickly. "Claire," he whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Did you turn that on?" She blinked sleepily, then her eyes widened as she saw it. "No. Why would I?" Before she could finish, the bathroom light flared to life. Then the lamp near the table clicked on. One by one, the old fixtures came alive, glowing with a pale, unnatural brightness. Claire gripped Alex's arm. "This isn't funny." He opened his mouth to reply, but then froze. In the mirror across the room, 2 figures stood, a man and a woman. Not them. The couple in the reflection wore clothes from another time. The man had slicked back hair and a suit jacket. The woman wore a polka-dotted dress and bright lipstick. They looked like they had stepped out of the 1950 seconds. But their faces were pale, their expressions hollow. Smoke curled faintly around their shoulders as if rising from an unseen fire. Claire gasped. In the real room, only she and Alex stood. But in the mirror, the ghostly couple stared back, their eyes fixed directly on them. Alex grabbed Claire's hand. "We're leaving." He tried to pull her toward the door, but the knob refused to turn no matter how hard he twisted it. Behind them, the mirror figures began to move, their mouths opening as if to speak, though no sound came out. The lamps buzzed louder. The air grew hot, suffocating, carrying the faint scent of smoke. Claire coughed, panic rising in her chest. Then the reflection of the man in the mirror raised his hand, pressing it against the glass. The woman followed, her expression sorrowful, eyes filled with something between grief and warning. The mirror shuddered as if the surface was about to crack. Alex pounded on the door. "Open! Come on, open!" The knob twisted suddenly, and the door swung free. They stumbled out into the night air, gasping. The lamps inside flickered violently before the room went dark. They didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, they sat in the car, too afraid to go back inside, watching the empty motel windows glow faintly with strange light. When the first rays of dawn spread across the desert, Alex finally said, "We should go." Now. They drove back to the highway, their car nearly running on fumes. After a few miles, Alex glanced in the rearview mirror. His eyes widened. Where the Desert Star Motel had stood only hours before, there were no buildings, no neon sign. Only a stretch of burned-out ruins, blackened timbers, and charred stone barely rising above the sand. Alex pulled the car to the side of the road, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Claire stared out the window, speechless. The ruins in the desert looked abandoned for decades, not for one night. The faint smell of smoke carried on the morning wind, though no fire burned now. "Did we really?" Claire's voice faltered. "Was it even real?" Alex swallowed hard. "We stayed there. We saw the manager. We had the key." It was all real. She hugged herself, shivering, though the sun was already hot. "But it can't be. That place is gone." They sat in silence, the engine idling. The ruins were silent, lifeless, but Alex could not shake the memory of the couple in the mirror. Their faces, frozen between sorrow and warning, were burned into his mind. Finally, he forced the car back onto the road. They needed gas, they needed distance, and they needed answers. Hours later, in a dusty town miles away, they pulled into a diner. The place looked worn but alive, filled with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Inside, a few locals sat at booths, their conversations quieting as the newcomers entered. Alex and Claire slid into a booth. A waitress with tired eyes poured them coffee without asking. Alex hesitated before speaking. "Do you know anything about a motel out by the desert highway called Desert Star Motel?" The waitress froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her apron. Slowly, she looked at him. "You saw it?" Claire leaned forward. "Last night, we stayed there. Room 6. The diner went silent. An older man at the counter turned his head sharply, his weathered face pale. "That place burned down," he said in a hoarse voice. "Back in the 50s. Whole building went up in flames. Took a young couple with it, newlyweds, I think. They never made it out." Claire's mouth went dry. "We saw them. In the mirror," the waitress whispered. "People say the motel shows itself on certain nights." Lonely travelers stop, thinking it's still there. Some come out shaken. Some never come out at all. Alex's stomach dropped. He remembered the locked door, the suffocating heat, the mirror shuddering as if the ghosts tried to cross over. "Why would it appear to us?" he asked. The old man shook his head. "Nobody knows. Maybe they're trapped, reliving their last night over and over. Maybe they're warning others not to stay." Claire pressed her hands together. "We left. We made it out. But it felt like they wanted us to see." The waitress lowered her voice. "Be grateful you did. Not everyone who goes there gets the chance." The conversation ended there. No one wanted to speak of it further. Alex and Claire finished their coffee in silence, the weight of the story pressing down on them. When they left the diner, the sun was high, and the desert stretched endlessly before them. The ruins of the motel lay far behind, but the memory of that night would not fade. For days afterward, neither of them spoke much about it. The world returned to normal: busy highways, crowded gas stations, buzzing neon signs of living motels. Yet sometimes, in the corner of a mirror, Alec swore he saw a flicker of smoke, a shadow of figures that did not belong. Claire, too, would wake in the night, insisting she heard faint buzzing, like the old lamps in room 6 turning themselves on again. They both knew the truth, even if they never said it aloud. The Desert Star Motel was not gone, not really. It waited in the dark stretches of the Nevada desert, flickering back into existence when the night was long and the road was empty. Somewhere out there, room 6 still stood, and inside its mirror, the lost couple still reached out, waiting for the next travelers to arrive. The highways stretched endlessly under the tired headlights of the truck. The driver, Mark, had been behind the wheel for 16 hours. His eyes burned, his muscles ached, and the road had turned into a blur of gray asphalt and white lines. He knew he had to stop. Fatigue was creeping into his bones, and the next mile felt heavier than the last. When he saw the faded neon sign glowing faintly in the distance, relief washed over him. It flickered with the word motel. The building stood isolated, a squat structure pressed against the dark trees. The lot was empty except for 2 rusted cars, their windows fogged. Mark pulled in and cut the engine. The silence of the night pressed down, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. Inside the lobby, a dim lamp revealed a cracked counter. On it stood a small wooden sign with the words, "Cash only." Behind the counter, an older man in a wrinkled shirt looked up. His eyes were tired, but his smile was polite. "Need a room?" the man asked. Mark nodded, pulling out a few bills from his wallet. The man took the money without counting it, then reached under the counter. He handed over a heavy brass key with the number 6 engraved on the tag. "Second floor. End of the hall," the man said. Mark thanked him and dragged his duffel bag toward the stairs. The carpet smelled of mildew. The air was damp and heavy, as if the place hadn't seen fresh air in years. Room 6 was at the far end, the door paint chipped and the number half scratched away. The lock clicked when he turned the key, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room looked plain. A single bed, a nightstand with a crooked lamp, and heavy curtains blocking out the night. Mark didn't care. He kicked off his boots, dropped his bag, and collapsed onto the mattress. The silence in the room was deep, almost unnatural. His eyelids grew heavy, and he slipped into uneasy sleep. Sometime after midnight, a sound pulled him awake. A slow, deliberate knocking on the door. 3 knocks, then silence. His heart thudded. He glanced at the clock on the nightstand. The red digits read 2:14 a.m. Another knock. Louder this time. He sat up, blood rushing to his ears. With shaky steps, he walked to the door. He pressed his eye to the peephole. A woman stood outside. She wore a long black dress and a dark veil that covered her face. Her figure was still, her head tilted slightly to the side as if listening. Then, in a whisper that crawled through the wood, he heard her words, "You took my place." The sound was soft, but it made his skin crawl. Mark stepped back, his breath quick. He didn't answer. He didn't move. The woman didn't knock again, but he felt her presence linger. For minutes, maybe longer, she stood there. Then, without sound, she was gone. He sat against the bed until morning light filtered through the curtains. Exhausted but alive, Mark decided to check out as quickly as possible. When he reached the front desk, the same old man looked up from a newspaper. Mark placed the brass key on the counter. "Room 6, he muttered, his voice dry. The man frowned. He leaned forward, studying the key. "That's not possible," the man said. "We don't have a room 6. That door's been locked for years." Mark blinked, cold confusion settling in. The man pushed the key back across the counter. "This doesn't belong to any room we rent." Mark stared at the brass key on the counter. His hands felt clammy, his throat dry. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I stayed there last night, room 6, end of the hall." The key fit. The door opened. The old man shook his head slowly. His eyes narrowed as if measuring Mark's words. "Son, that hallway ends at room 5. The door after that has been shut for decades. No key has worked there since I started here. You must be mistaken." Mark wanted to argue, but the memory of the peeling paint, the creak of the door, and the stale air inside the room came back with sharp clarity. He wasn't mistaken. He had spent the night there. He could still smell the damp sheets on his clothes. "Then where did this come from?" he asked, tapping the brass key with his finger. The man picked it up and turned it in his hand. His face darkened. "That belongs to the West Wing. That part was sealed after a fire years ago. No one is supposed to go in there." A cold weight sank in Mark's stomach. He wanted to leave right then, but curiosity held him back. "What fire?" he asked. The old man's voice dropped. "A woman died there. Guessed? Long time ago. Some say she never checked out." Mark felt his pulse quicken. The image of the veiled figure outside his door returned with brutal clarity. Her words echoed in his head. "You took my place." He grabbed his duffel bag and walked out to the parking lot. The sun was rising, but its warmth did nothing to shake the chill clinging to him. He climbed into the cab of his truck, started the engine, and told himself to forget it. He had miles to cover and deadlines to meet, but the road felt different that day. Every time he checked his mirrors, he swore he saw the faint outline of a figure in the back seat of his cab, a shape draped in black, unmoving, watching. Each time he blinked, it vanished. By evening, exhaustion forced him to pull over at a rest stop. He climbed into the sleeper berth, trying to push away the unease. Sleep took him, restless and shallow. He woke to the sound of knocking again. Not on the truck door this time, but directly inside his head. He opened his eyes and found the cab filled with the faint scent of smoke and flowers. At the foot of his bed, she stood. The veil hung over her face, but he could see her lips moving beneath it. The same whisper, clearer now, filled the cabin. "You took my place." Mark scrambled upright, his heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. Her voice grew sharper. "My bed, my room, my rest." The air turned icy, his breath visible in the dark. His hands shook as he reached for the ignition key, but when he turned it, the truck refused to start. The lights flickered, then died. The woman stepped closer. He backed against the wall of the sleeper berth. "I didn't know," he said desperately. "I didn't know it was yours." She leaned down, her veil brushing against him. For the first time, he saw her face beneath the fabric. Pale skin, burned scars across one side, eyes black with grief and fury. "You can't leave," she whispered. Mark shouted, flung the door open, and tumbled out into the gravel. The night air hit him like ice water. The figure remained inside the cab, standing still, watching him through the windshield. Other truckers at the rest stopped to turn their heads at the commotion. One of them walked over, concerned. "You okay, buddy?" Mark blinked. The cab was empty again. No woman, no veil. The engine started with the single turn of the key. He laughed nervously, waved off the stranger, and drove off into the night. But the laughter didn't last, because when he stopped at the next diner, he found something waiting on his passenger seat. The brass key, tarnished, heavy, its number etched deep into the metal. 6. Mark never stayed in roadside motels again. and no matter how many miles he put between himself and that night, he could never rid himself of the thought that room 6 still waited for him, and that one day he would return to it. The road stretched out in front of them like an endless ribbon of asphalt, dark and empty under the fading light of evening. Greg sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The old highway was quiet, almost too quiet, and the only sound inside the car was the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio picking up static. "Are we there yet?" Mark asked from the back seat, his tone more impatient than playful. "Almost," Greg said. "There's a motel a few miles ahead. Cheap, no frills, but it will do." "Anything is better than sleeping in the car," Sarah muttered. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The desert air was cooling fast, and night was creeping in with a sharp bite. They were 4 friends on a cross-country trip, taking the less traveled roads out of curiosity and stubbornness. Highway 50 was their route tonight, a stretch of road in Nevada that locals called the loneliest road in America. Gas stations were rare, towns even rarer, and the silence of the desert pressed against them with every passing mile. When the neon sign of the motel finally appeared in the distance, flickering weakly against the dusk, relief filled the car. The building itself looked like something from another time. A long, low structure with peeling paint, wooden doors, and a buzzing sign that simply read, "Motel." A lone light bulb swung above the office door. Greg parked in front, and the group stepped out, stretching their stiff legs. The air smelled faintly of dust and oil. Inside the office, a thin man with sunken eyes sat behind the counter. He looked at them for a long moment before speaking. "Rooms are for single travelers only," the man said flatly. The group exchanged confused looks. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Policy," the man replied. "This place only accommodates those traveling alone. If you want to stay, you check in one by one, separate rooms." "That's ridiculous," Mark said, half laughing. Greg, tired and uninterested in arguing, leaned against the counter. "We'll take the rooms," he said. The man slid the old guest book forward. The pages were yellowed, filled with names written in faded ink. Each of them signed, one after another, and the man handed out 4 rusty keys. "Room doors close at midnight," the clerk said. "Don't wander after that." The warning sounded strange, but Greg pushed it aside. They carried their bags down the dim hallway, the carpet stained and the walls lined with old wallpaper that was peeling at the corners. Each friend entered their own room, the doors creaking on their hinges. Greg's room was simple. A single bed, a wooden chair, and a lamp that flickered when he switched it on. He sat on the bed and listened. Through the thin walls, he could hear faint footsteps, slow and heavy, moving somewhere down the corridor. At first, he assumed it was one of his friends. But then Sarah knocked quietly on his door. "Did you hear that?" she whispered when he opened. Greg nodded. Footsteps. They peered down the corridor together. At the far end, near the last room, a tall figure stood under the weak light. The man wore a long coat and a cowboy hat, pulled low over his face. His frame was rigid, unnatural, as if he were more shadow than flesh. "Who is that?" Sarah whispered. Greg's throat tightened. Probably another guest. But the man didn't move. He just stood there, the brim of his hat hiding his face, the air around him heavy and cold. Then, slowly, he turned and walked down the hall, his boots echoing against the floor. Greg closed the door and locked it. Neither he nor Sarah said another word about it that night. Sometime after midnight, Greg woke suddenly. The sound of footsteps returned, steady and deliberate, passing by his door. He sat up, his pulse racing. The footsteps stopped right outside. He held his breath, staring at the door. A long silence followed, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the steps moved on. In the morning, the sunlight streaming through the thin curtains felt almost unreal. Greg got dressed quickly and went to check on the others. Mark and Sarah were already outside, sipping weak coffee from paper cups. Their faces were pale. "Where's David?" Mark asked. Greg frowned. "I thought he was with you." They searched the rooms. David's bed was untouched, his bag still in the corner. No sign of him. Panic began to build as they checked the hallway and the parking lot. The office clerk only shrugged when they asked. "No, David checked in here," he said. "That's impossible," Sarah snapped. "He signed the book last night." Greg grabbed the guest book and flipped through the pages. His hand froze when he saw it. There was David's name, written clearly, but the date beside it read 1978. Greg stared at the page, his chest tightening. The ink looked old, faded into the paper as if it had been there for decades. The clerk leaned over the counter, his expression unreadable. "Like I said, this place is for single travelers only." Greg dropped the book onto the counter, his hands shaking. 1978. That's impossible. David was here last night. The clerk's eyes remained cold and unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, folding his long, bony fingers. Names don't always match the present. Sometimes the road. It chooses who stays. Mark shook his head, his voice rising. "What the hell are you talking about? Where is he?" Greg opened the office door and stepped back into the hallway. The motel seemed empty, the air heavy and still. He thought he saw movement at the far end, just a shadow, long and thin, wearing that same cowboy hat. The figure didn't turn its head, didn't even acknowledge them. It simply glided forward, and then it was gone. Checked the surrounding area, walking down the deserted road, but there was no sign of David. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. The wind whispered faintly, carrying a dry, unsettling scent. Returning to the motel, Greg noticed the guest book again. His stomach sank as he saw another entry appearing slowly on the page, as if written by an unseen hand. This time, it wasn't David's full name, it was just initials, but the year was unmistakable, 1982. "What's happening here?" Sarah whispered, clutching Greg's arm. Mark's phone had no signal, no bars, no chance to call for help. It was as if the desert had swallowed them completely, isolating them from the world. Greg forced himself to remain calm. "We need to leave, now." They gathered their things and ran to the car. The engine started with a shudder, and they sped onto Highway 50, tires kicking up dust. The motel disappeared behind them as they drove. The sun climbed higher, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Hours passed. No towns, no gas stations, nothing but flat desert and the endless black ribbon of asphalt. And then, faintly, the sound of boots on pavement reached Greg's ears, slow, deliberate, echoing. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. But the sense of being watched grew unbearable. They pulled over at a small clearing, hearts pounding. Greg got out, scanning the horizon. The desert was still, quiet. But in the distance, the shadow of a man appeared on the road. Tall, stiff, wearing a cowboy hat. The figure did not move naturally. Its head remained fixed, facing forward, no sign of a face, just a hollow presence that seemed to stretch time itself. "We have to keep going," Greg said firmly, climbing back into the car. As they drove, the road twisted, though the map suggested a straight path. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of their vision, shapes of people appearing and disappearing in an instant. Fear settled over them like a heavy blanket. Night fell again. The desert seemed alive, the silence punctuated by distant, unexplainable sounds. Greg's headlights cut a thin path through the darkness, illuminating glimpses of something moving off the side of the road. A tall figure standing still, then vanishing as soon as they approached. Sarah screamed when a figure appeared in the lane ahead, perfectly still, forcing Greg to swerve. The car skidded onto the dirt shoulder, throwing them against the doors. When Greg looked back, the road was empty. The figure had disappeared. Mark, pale and shaking, muttered, "It's like the motel never wanted us to leave." Greg's jaw tightened. "Then we have to keep driving. No stopping." Hours later, with exhaustion setting in, they finally saw lights in the distance. A small town, tiny and unwelcoming. They pulled into the first gas station they found. The attendant was a woman, older, with eyes that seemed too sharp for her age. "Long road, huh?" she said, smiling faintly. "Some travelers never make it past that stretch." Greg glanced at her, uneasy. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "Highway 50 doesn't forget. People vanish all the time. Some end up back there in the motel, waiting, or traveling alone. Time is funny out there." The friends stared at one another, the terror of the night settling deep in their bones. They never spoke of the motel again, and none of them wanted to return. Yet, in the back of Greg's mind, he knew the shadow was still out there, waiting for the next travelers, patient, silent, eternal. Years later, Greg would look at an old map of Nevada and feel a shiver. Highway 50 stretched empty and quiet, just as it always had. And somewhere, deep in the desert, the guest book waited, pages filled with names that should not exist, time bending around those who stayed, forever marked by the man in the cowboy hat. Even now, he sometimes dreams of that hallway, the flickering lamp, the shadow that never turned. And he wonders if David is still there, or if he has become another name in the book, waiting silently for the next traveler to check in, alone. The road is lonely, the motel is patient, and some things never leave.